Good. All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, everybody, really appreciate everybody being so prompt so we can begin a minute or two early and maybe wrap up a minute or two early. I'm Nick Johnson. I'm the director of the Tax Revision Commission. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm really grateful for all of you for being here at this conversation about focusing on real estate in downtown. We are live streaming, we are recording. I know we have one of our, probably a couple of our participants today on the screen and virtual, and we'll weave them into the conversation. We also may have some members of our commission joining online. We did at our earlier session. We had at least 3 people, I think, joining online. So I'll say more about them in a moment. I want to start by introducing the members of the commission who are here in person. In a few minutes, I'll let Mayor Williams say a few words, the chair of the commission. Erica Williams, Gregory McCarthy, Yeshua Sayan, Carolyn Rudd, are all commission members, and then Mike Egerman and Becky Strauss are serving as staff to the commission. And in a few minutes, I'll let all of you introduce yourselves and say a few words about why you're here and the perspectives you're bringing to the table. But I wanted to start by giving you a bit of an overview of our work and particularly where we are in the process right now. If you've been following the work of the commission at all, you know that every 10 years or so, the mayor and the council appoints an 11-member commission to do a careful review of the entire DC tax system. And the last tax commission back in 2013 did advance pretty major changes, and many of them were actually adopted by the council and the mayor. So we have big shoes to fill. At the same time, a lot has changed over the last 10 years. The economy has changed, the tax base has changed, community priorities have changed. And so we feel we have a really important opportunity through this commission to rethink the tax system from top to bottom and propose to the mayor and the council a set of recommendations that will meet a group of principles that the commission has adopted this year. In terms of sort of the process that we're following, the key principles are 3. One is to follow the data and make sure recommendations are based on sound research. 2 is to ensure our recommendations are rooted and shaped by the experiences and needs of people across the district from a diversity of perspectives. And 3, that our recommendations are devised collaboratively to ensure bold, thoughtful changes. We have a fairly diverse commission, and we're looking for recommendations that can bring them together. In our recommendations, the commission has agreed as a body that it will aim to achieve the following. One is a broader and more resilient tax base for a post-COVID economy in order to protect against economic shifts and shocks and ensure future funding for high-quality public services and to share tax burdens fairly across the community. 2, progressivity and racial equity to eliminate racial disparities, protect low-income residents, and lift up the district's middle class. 3, economic efficiency and competitiveness to advance growth and prosperity for all residents. And 4, simple, open, and fair administrative processes to reduce compliance burdens for residents and businesses. That's a tall order. You all represent really important constituencies in the district, and so we're excited to hear from you all today. And through this and through our other options for engagement, learn more about what shifts you think can help us reach these goals and build a healthy and thriving district for the decade to come. So let me say a word about the overall structure and timeline of our work. Right now, we are in the middle of a 3-week period when we are convening about 10 meetings with small groups like this one, key stakeholders who we think can bring key points of perspective into our deliberation. We're also holding 2 public meetings at which members of the general public can present their perspectives. One is a May 1st meeting in person. The other is May 4th. Both of those are in the evenings. We encourage you to use your networks to get the word out about those. Our job in these sessions as commissioners and as staff is to listen and learn. And I want you to know that we at this point haven't ruled anything in or out in terms of options. Now we have talked a lot and heard a lot about the challenges that our tax system face. And just to name a few, and I'm sure you all will be adding to this list, we face a changing economy that's certainly affecting the tax revenue that comes into the district. We're facing a tax system in which some taxes hit hardest at those with least ability to pay. We have a tax system that has a number of tax breaks, sometimes somewhat hidden, that benefit a relatively small number of taxpayers. Of course, we're in a federal context, a federal district, in which federal law shields Maryland and Virginia commuters from taxation. We're facing economic competition from our neighbors around the country, facing a situation where aspects of our tax code reinforce racial inequity. And of course, we're facing a tax system that a lot of folks find is complicated and hard to deal with, maybe too much so. Now, not all of these challenges lead directly or easily to solutions. We certainly recognize that some of them are technically difficult. They involve trade-offs. So we've been hearing from a lot of different folks about a lot of different policy options. And we've been trying to make sure to post all of our deliberations on our website, as well as lists of options as they come in. And we're going to continue to do that as we go through the process. Over the summer and into the fall, the commission is going to begin to refine and narrow down our list of potential policy options. And the strong goal, and really the mandate from the council, is by December to have a final package of recommendations to present. So again, as we refine and develop them, we will be continuing to post them to the website, discuss them publicly, and there will be additional ongoing chances for folks to weigh in and communicate with us individually and as a group via our website on these proposals as they bubble up and as they're refined. And then, of course, as the package as a whole, as it comes together. So the last thing I'll say about our overall work is that we know this is a pretty hard job, and it's particularly a hard job this year. The last tax revision commission compiled its recommendations, as it turned out, in a time of rapidly growing revenues and budget surpluses. According to the CFO estimates, now we are in one time of much more constrained revenues when forecasts are being revised downwards. To be clear, we don't have any specified direction from the council or mayor in terms of overall revenue, what direction our recommendation should go. But it's worth noting that the last tax revision commission on net, the things that the council passed ended up costing the district revenue. But that was during the time of budget surpluses. It's not clear that policymakers this time around are going to have that option. So we have definitely our work cut out for us. So as I said, today's conversation is about listening and learning from you. We're happy to answer questions you might have from us about the work of the commission, but just know that our main purpose is to collect your ideas. You're probably not going to hear a lot of opinions from us about which way we think we should go. You might get some loaded questions, some probing questions, but try not to read too much into that. Doesn't mean we've made our mind up. That's the nature of the beast here. So we're going to go around. I'm going to go ask each of you to introduce yourself, say a few words about your name, your organizational affiliation, brief summary of what community or perspective you represent at this table, and your priorities and ideas for the work of the commission. A number of you have submitted comments in advance, statements in advance, and that was really, really appreciated. Very, very helpful. Had a chance to review those. Try really hard to keep your remarks. We've got a pretty good number of people at the table and a couple of folks online. So I'm going to ask you to keep your remarks really to 2 or 3 minutes so that we can get into the conversation. I'm sure everything you want to say will come up in the course of this discussion. And then after that, we'll get into commissioner questions to you. And I'll just note that a couple of commissioners have now joined us online. Jody McLean and Glenn Lee are also both online, so we'll give them a chance to chime in as well. This is being recorded, streamed live and recorded, and this will be posted to the website along with a summary of the conversation, again, in the interest of being transparent. So again, just thanks so much for being here. I'm going to let Mayor Williams say a few words of welcome.
Yeah, so welcome everybody, and I noticed you keep saying the last tax commission was in a period of bountiful revenues, so it was easy. You're just kissing our leadership, but that's okay. It's very, but it is hard. This is it's a more difficult moment. We do have declining revenues. We are facing, an unprecedented, situation for the downtown. So we are in a different kind of situation. So, our work is very, very important. And just a couple of things. One, learning, from our experience in the last commission, we really have made an effort to try to use the Tax Division Commission, not only to come to specific recommendations of what here in the council, but also to use it as a teaching moment for the district. And in order to do that, we wanted to go beyond the typical is, Councilman Evans, former Councilman Evans would certainly appreciate, go beyond the open mic night, which we are gonna have, but to really have active engagement with different sectors of the community, as well as the open engagement. Two, to be able to sit down, with specific individuals, whatever, who provide us with specialized expertise on particular work products, and have that kind of, engagement as well. So for example, I noticed that we have a detailed proposal here on revising the, district's taxes. I think we owe it to folks like this. We owe it to Ed Lazier yesterday from United Planning Organization, who had a detailed proposal to respond to them in detail to their proposal. So we will do that, even if we don't do it here. I think we should do it fairly and, across the board, and I commit that the commission will do that. So with that, we really appreciate everyone, your leadership, your contribution to our city. And I'll turn it over to my fellow commissioners if they want to say anything.
We will go ahead and dive in again. Please try to be succinct in your remarks so that we can get into the back. I'm going to start. I'm going to just go down the list I have, and we'll start with Richard Lake from Developer Roundtable.
Good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Richard Lake. I'm here today representing the Developer Roundtable. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to this body and address a number of concerns that we've had in the past related to DC's policies and specifically tax policies. Today we're going to also hear from DCBIA, which I also am privileged to be the president of, and I'm not going to be repetitive. So I'll allow the leadership of DCBIA to take kind of a point by point discussion on some of the concerns that the other members of the building community have. Such as sunsetting the increased recordation taxes and also looking at the unincorporated business tax, which has put a significant burden on a lot of our professionals. I think today and the mayor mentioned it, we are in a very odd, troubling moment in time. We're coming out of COVID, where we had a lot of pressures on our economy. We are seeing a shift in demand. We're seeing a shift in utilization of traditional commercial real estate. So therefore, we are going to see dynamic change in how we utilize our infrastructure. And we spent a fair amount of money in the last number of decades to invest in the downtown core. And we see a downtown that is struggling tremendously. And I will submit my comments, so I won't read it, but I really just want more into the discussion points. I think tax policy is critical, but also looking at other regulatory policies that impede the ability to attract capital. DC was in the top 3 investment cities in the world. They were 50 well. So that means the institutional capital does not see DC as a primary place to invest in. And that's driven by a number of factors. Some of these are related to our tax policy, some of it is related to other regulatory policies, like TOPA, or some other things that create impediments to invest and have sense of certainty in the outcomes. Today, we're seeing office product, the highest vacancies in the Pacific, in my lifetime. And I think it's a little bit obscured by the fact that we don't count the sublease market. If you count the sublease market today, which should really give you a sense of what the users will do, you're going to see another 10 to 15 percentage points increase in vacancy. So we're going to 20 to 30, 35. vacancy. So when those tenants renew, the actual use of renewing space, if that stays whole, will see a significant increase in vacancy, which puts these buildings in incredibly difficult. We have a lot of older buildings that are not necessarily easily to be adaptively reused, so we have to look at them as opportunities to repurpose, either to tear down or to actually utilize the structure, but very few of them will actually be able to utilize the structure. The dimensions, the building types, the way they've been organized in their block don't make them very habitable for our uses. And so we have to think about our lagging inventory of uses that buildings that need to be used. And what we do is we lose vibrancy. My previous position, I was co-chair of the economic partnership for nearly a decade, and our mission was to bring retail into the for city and all for neighborhoods. That was a process that took over 20 years of hard work to bring our retail vibrancy to our city. We are at the risk right now of losing those entrepreneurs and that vibrancy. So if we don't get these buildings into productive hands, we're going to see a continuous deterioration of the physical asset, and therefore continuing to the problems of safety, sense of security, and then it basically just becomes a process where it builds on itself as it's spiraling down. So I would look at recommending, and you're going to hear from others, but one idea that I think would be very powerful is that we have a real-time assessment modifications to the valuations of these buildings that are falling behind in their debt equity ratios. We're going to have probably 50% of our buildings right now that are currently not worth the debt that's on the property. So therefore, there's no incentive to put any more capital in by the current ownership. We are seeing an impediment to transfer those properties out from under that current ownership and bring in new capital because of the liquidation tax. So critically important, is sunset. We have to send a message to the investment community that cities said they were going to sunset liquidation, they need to follow through with that. If they don't, will have a detrimental impact. But they also would like us to think about how important it is to put these buildings back into productive use. So if a building is below its current debt, then there should be no liquidation tax. Get them out from under that sponsor. That is impeding a number of buildings. I'll give you an example. There's a $400 million asset that has a net under 10%. So they have $40 million invested in the property. They're willing to step in, reinvest in the building, and take out the sponsor. Sponsor is willing to do that. The problem is, to record that transfer, recordation currently would be over $20 million. So instead of putting $20 million in the building, which is escalating in like tenant improvement allowances, which is, by the way, 2.5 times what the city put aside for vitality fund. So you can see how important it would be to attract new tenants. Or to keep the buildings up, that tax is an impediment. So right now they're not moving on that, and they're not investing those dollars into the physical asset. And so therefore, how many of those buildings do we have in the city that are right now not being utilized? And we have a risk of that policy interrupting our ability to get new capital, to get new light, to get new vibrancy into the city and the downtown core. And I'll leave with this. To me, economic development is not just about tax revenue. It's not just about the budget. You know, we're spending $20 billion and 670,000 souls. It's about providing quality of life. It's about providing opportunity to lift the citizens of the district into new professions, into new opportunities. And if we lose that center core, we're going to lose the entire middle class of DC. And we're going to continue to hollow out our city.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Next on my list is Liz DeBarros, DCBA.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, commissioners. Thank you for convening this important real estate stakeholder input session. We have submitted our detailed recommendations to you, and in the room you are joined by my colleagues, Erica Waddlington, our board member, Tanya Castro, and you just heard from Board President Richard Lake for the Developers Roundtable. I'm sorry I cannot be with you in person today. I am Liz DeBarros, CEO of DCBIA. As you know, DCBIA is a leading organization solely focused on development in the district in all neighborhoods that make up our great city. We are on the front lines in zoning, density creation, housing, neighborhood amenities, commercial corridors, generational wealth building, affordability, and jobs, to name a few aspects the industry touches. We appreciate the questions you sent us as they speak to the new and unexpected actions we must take to revitalize downtown. We have 3 recommendations to advance the DC's economic efficiency and competitiveness. 1, allowing the commercial property deed and recordation tax to sunset, as it is written in law on September 30th. More buildings changing ownership by reducing this tax will directly increase the amount of available funding for the Housing Production Trust Fund each year. 2, institutionalizing and advancing the tax rate change for real property. There is a great and growing need to change the use of buildings in downtown. Currently, changing the current tax designation to non-commercial happens too late in the process. A formal regulatory path and the issuance of guidance would help with property tax budgeting and give the industry more predictability in building classification. We also suggest that when a building or property lot is changing use, the property tax should be classified when the building permit is issued and when a planned unit development covenant has been recorded, which will bind the landowner to those plans. 3, we recommend reinstituting the liquid exemption to the unincorporated business franchise tax to encourage future investment. And on the matter of merger of entities, historically, mergers have not been taxable, but now OTR has determined that a merger of interest is a taxable event and is regulating this taxation. OTR has relied upon a court case that we believe is misapplied to impose transfer and recordation taxes on the real property assets of mergers, but that case does not address mergers. Rather, the case addresses the transfer of real property for consideration between distinct legal entities. We heard testimony on a previous date before this commission regarding the idea that the district should explore tax in REITs. Specifically, only one jurisdiction, New Hampshire, has this proposed tax, which is not common among our neighboring jurisdictions. DCBI agrees with the majority of the commissioners who raised concerns about this proposal and its impact on capital investment and revitalization of our central business district. Our members caution the commission about implementing such a proposal that is not aligned with our regional competitive goals and would discourage economic development and investment. To support improvements to the tax code, we recommend more coordination between the Department of Buildings and OTRs regarding vacant property designation. Even with significant proof that a building is not vacant, including leases, ongoing redevelopment, renovation efforts, and an active building permit, a building can remain classified vacant as OTR. Having cross-agency coordination via real-time data sharing between Department of Buildings and OTR and appropriate enforcement, as well as granting the agencies the ability to authorize retroactive and mid-tax period reclassification, would clarify that leased properties that have not been built out by the tenant should not be classified as vacant. Moreover, buildings should not be classified as vacant while the project advances through the design and approval process. Additionally, we request that the exemption time limits for properties that have building permit are under active construction be extended. We also asked exemptions for buildings that require permits from BZA or zoning commission receive maximum time of limit of 18 months instead of 12 months. Finally, OTR has taken the position in context of an assignment of an existing ground lease that there should be a transfer and recordation tax on both, 1, the stated consideration for combined purchase, and 2, the value of the underlying fee simple interest in the land. However, this is inconsistent with the statute. A deed conveying title real property is taxed based on the amount of consideration for the deed. OTR sees these transactions as a transfer, but we would argue that it is in fact just a retaking of the land. This additional taxation may cause developers to not invest in the district and is an outlier compared to other jurisdictions. To close, we appreciate the question you also asked about the commission, what the commission could do to engage the community further to collect more ideas and feedback on the DC tax system. We suggest that as you continue to develop ideas, to hold another round of discussion meetings once you have actual written changes for the affected industry to react to, and that would be a great addition to this process. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. We look forward to continuing to work with you regarding these issues to make the district a more competitive place to invest and thrive.
Erica, you're also on my list, but I assume you have additional things you want to?
Nothing, we could ask questions.
And Tanya, same.
I'm here for support and they have
Great,
questions.
thank you. Ms. Fuss?
Yes. So good afternoon, Director Johnson, Chairman Williams, and distinguished commission members. My name is David Fuss. I'm an attorney at Wilkes Artis here in DC. And I'm very pleased to be here today to provide you some of AOBA's comments regarding the important tax questions and policy choices this commission is taking under review. As you may be aware, the Apartment and Office Building Association of Metropolitan Washington is an active non-profit trade association representing owners and managers of over 107,000 apartment units and over 76 million square feet of office space. As such, our members are direct stakeholders in this commission's work, and they are very focused on the ultimate recommendations the commission may make to the mayor and the city council, especially in this dire real estate market environment we've been experiencing. We believe the commission recognizes the battered state of the DC commercial real estate market since you, Mr. Chairman, were a signatory to the Federal City Council's November letter to Mr. Glenn Lee, the district's chief financial officer. And we agree with all that was said to Mr. Lee, except for one phrase. That phrase was, quote, "Our interest in this matter is not about being overtaxed." Well, we, as the direct targets of OTR's out-of-touch assessment valuations, are keenly disturbed about being overtaxed. As one AOBA member put it, "My tax bill and everything else is increasing, except the occupancy of my building, the office rents I can achieve, and the value of my investment." Indeed, despite profound rises in interest rates, tenant space contraction, financing lows, massive tenant concession costs, and acceleration of lender takebacks and mortgage defaults, the assessments on our members' properties actually increased from tax year 22 to tax year 23, and not decreased for tax year 24 to any material extent. The terribly tragic truth is that the DC Assessor's Office has not recognized this cataclysmic wave that has swept away years of built-up value. And what's more unnerving is that it is unclear due to the systematic change in societal work practices how and when the commercial market will stop its free fall and stabilize. So AOBA has put forth in our submitted official testimony a number of points, and I'd like to go over some of that now. We, like others, agree that the sunset provision on the tax and recordation tax is key and it must sunset. This has been inhibitory to district growth. Regarding office to residential conversions, the tax breaks need to be non-discretionary, specified particularly, and geographically expanded. When you look at the mayor's proposal, a developer owner who wants to do a conversion is perplexed at how to basically blue line any kind of tax relief because it's so discretionary. We also would suggest restructure the rules for surplus revenues to allow targeted spending towards such items as emergency rental assistance, workforce training, and the upkeep and maintenance of affordable housing. Also, we recommend decreasing the parking tax from 18% to 10%, while at the same time provide WMATA a dedicated tax-based funding source. We also suggest to amend the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, TOPA, to provide an alternative such as a contribution, a percentage of sales price into another type of affordable housing or emergency rental assistance type of program. Another proposal is to tax affordable housing units at a discount for market units, especially in light of increased operational costs. allow property that is undergoing, and I've heard this from others, allow property that is undergoing residential construction to be taxed at the Class 1 residential rate after a building permit has been issued and active construction is undertaken. Currently, the tax office will simply put on the commercial tax rate on these conversions, and that's twice the tax a residential unit would. Allow the owners of property that are being taken by the city under eminent domain to introduce the property's assessed value as an element of value to be considered by the finder of fact as allowed in Maryland. Those basically wrap up our general recommendations or suggestions. We've also attached specific tax code modifications to our official testimony. Thank you.
John Ritz, WC Smith.
Thank you very much. I'll introduce myself first. I'm president of WC Smith. In June, I will have been serving as a property management executive for Smith for 47 years. Our 55-year anniversary is this summer, and I think while there are a lot of ideas that are being discussed today that are far-reaching, I guess I want to bring it down to a little more granular level. I've always considered ourselves good corporate citizens as residents of Washington, having developed the ARC in Southeast Washington and given back in many ways. But I want to speak about affordable housing, the challenges that we're facing with way in which valuations are created and what's happening through OTR and the difficulty we have in finding ways to make operating affordable housing viable in the district. We manage about 9,000 apartments, and 3,000 of those have low-income housing tax credit designation. And about another 3,400 are used euphemistically as naturally affordable, rent-controlled, older buildings in every ward of the city. But we have a fairly high concentration in Ward 8 and 7. So I'll give you an example. Instead of talking theoretically, let me talk to you about the world that I live in every day. We have a 574 unit garden apartment project in Southeast Washington that has struggled through the pandemic. We've received over $3.5 million in rental subsidies for tenants. Right now, as of today, as of the end of the last month, I've got $1.5 million in receivables. None of that's reflected in valuation. It sure is in operations, but we can barely make our mortgage and pay the cost of operating. You know, a thermic gas, a kilowatt hour of electricity, a gallon of water costs the same for me in an affordable project in Ward 8 as it does in Ward 3. My average rent's $1,100 a month. There, it's at least twice that. None of this is taken into consideration when I sit in front of an assessor at OTR. They want to talk to me about CAMA models and percentages of expenses. I show them expenses that run 70% of my actual collected income. And they say, well, our model doesn't reflect that. Well, it better reflect it if you want operators like us who've been in this business for 55 years to stay here. But it's not viable. I don't understand when we present actual data during appeals to OTR, and I'm living this every day, and we're on the ground trying to make these properties function, and it's rejected, it's ignored. There's something broken. You know, not only do they need help, you know, many of the sales of affordable housing are going to nonprofits. Wonderful. They're mission driven, and God love them. We work with many of them and have tried to support them in many ways over the years. But the minute they buy it, there's no tax revenue. They can file as a nonprofit and stop paying real estate taxes. Well, I can't, but I've been operating some of these properties for 30 and 35 years. And they need to be recapitalized. There needs to be debt placed on them. We can't cover debt service now. So the tax burden for affordable housing is uniquely discriminatory. And there's no obvious recognition in OTR. I file the appeals. I sit in those hearings, and I've been doing it for 30 years, since we were in a little back room in the Wilson building in the 80s, with curtains between the tables.
it just seems like we're talking on deaf ears. On the one hand, there's money allocated to build, and we all knew what it cost. Housing, whether it's affordable or not, it's astronomical. And yet there seems to be no cognizant effort at maintaining the affordable housing inventory that we now have in the city. It just isn't. And anybody who says differently, come in my car one day. Let me drive you around the city that I know. And I'll tell you right now, you won't have the same conclusion to your opinion at the end of that day. So I'm not here to present a lot of proposals. There are people here who are a lot smarter than I am. I'm just, this is my job. This is my business. This is my career. It's been my vocation. And it is increasingly impossible, not difficult, impossible to make numbers work on affordable housing and have that reality ignored through OTR and evaluation. This property that I'm referring to has a 28% increase in proposed tax value for 2024, 28%. What model, what analysis could come up with a 28% increase in this time during the pandemic when these are challenged households? They are suffering housing insecurity. We understand that. We work with these folks every day. So we know it better than anybody. How on earth can the model develop a 28% proposed tax increase on a property like that? It's broken is the answer. It's broken. And there's no recognition in that process for the challenges of affordable housing. So I just would like to bring that to the attention of the commission, and those are the extent of my remarks. Thank you very much.
And your company, is this Chris Smith?
Yeah.
Same character. Okay, you said something Smith, that's Chris, okay.
Paul Doherty.
Good afternoon, I'm Paul Doherty, and I'm a PRB. I'm joined today by Landon McKenzie to my right. We are a real estate investment company. We operate in DC, but we own assets nationally. We have a 10 million square foot portfolio of headquarters buildings around the country, some of the biggest Fortune 500 companies. So it gives us a unique perspective as to how CEOs choose cities to move into. Over the past 9 months, I've been working with Landon here and other colleagues to really understand the DC budget and how we can propose changes to the income taxes in DC. Partially by my work serving as a trustee in the Federal City Council, where we're keenly focused on, among other things, attracting, retaining companies and workers to DC. We believe the work of the Tax Review Commission is as critical as ever, can serve many purposes at various times with DC. Can create progressive and forward-thinking tax regime, attract population back to the city, which is much needed. Serve as a catalyst for growth, prosperity to all citizens. And equally important, it can help alleviate social ills such as high crime, inadequate schools, improve the poor perception that others have in DC. When you hear about our proposed changes, please keep in mind two undeniable facts. Number one, technology and working from home has enabled the migration of companies and taxpayers, particularly high wage earners, from areas of high income taxes to those of low income taxes. Texas is a perfect example, as is Florida. Number two, cities need to retain and attract high wage earners. In DC as of 2002, residents making over $100,000 accounted for 84% of the total income tax revenue received by the city. The 84% of income tax revenue generated by 27% of total residents filed taxes in DC. If income taxes are raised further to account for shortfalls in future budgets, there will continue to be an excess of the city of high wage earners, which we can't afford to have happen. The presentation, but I'm just going to flip around to a couple of pages if you have it in front of you. Our plan calls for shifting a portion of page 4, the tax burden from personal income taxes to residential property taxes and general sales taxes. To change the perception of DC as a high tax city. There are 3 elements of our plan, and this is all in a model that we've created and we would send to the committee as well. One is to increase the residential real property tax millage rate from 0.73% to 1.11%. And our plan, properties assessed less than $1 million will not see an increase in real estate property taxes. Part of this would be to also increase the millage rate on multifamily properties, which may not be popular to a few of those on the table right now, which are currently assessed at residential properties rates, and our proposal would tax these at commercial rates. 2, increase the general sales tax from 6% to 7%. And 3, decrease the total individual income tax revenue on revenue collected. Our model reduces income tax collected by $955 million annually, and this can be phased in over time. The way it's modeled now, these changes take place immediately. Our assumptions are based on tax revenue projections from the Office of the Chief Financial Officer, February 2023, revenue estimates dated 2/28/23, and are laid out in our presentation. The results of these changes are as follows. Total residential and real property tax revenue increases on average by $579 million. Total general sales tax revenue increases on average by $376 million. Total individual income tax revenue is reduced by an average of $955 million annually from 2023 to 2027. And DC residents on average save a total of $208 million annually from taxes saved by the reduced income taxes, by increasing the other tax areas. So why does this make sense? DC currently faces the need to get people back in the city to live, work, and spend. Will face a fiscal cliff in the coming years that may be impossible to recover from. There are myriad of issues working against DC's favorability. Businesses are leaving DC and moving to Maryland, Virginia, states that are perceived to be more pro-business. Commercial property vacancies, as Richard mentioned, are historic high. By our numbers, they're 37% in downtown DC. And commercial property values are crashing due to work from home shift brought about through the pandemic. The historic playbook of raising income taxes to fill shortfalls in the budget will drive more people out of DC. You only have to look at cities like New York City, Chicago, and California to prove that raising taxes produces the opposite of the desired effect. Crime and perception of crime in DC has gotten worse in the years and keeping people away from downtown DC. DC public schools are inferior and are challenged compared to those in Maryland, Virginia. And DC does not have, frankly, the revenue from a state to help absorb the overhead of the shortfalls. So why is this needed now? Reducing income tax will facilitate people moving back into the city, as lower income taxes will incentivize them to move back. Paying less income tax will also keep residents of DC in DC, while also incentivizing people to move back into the city. Progressive real estate, residential real estate property tax on single-family homes, townhomes and condos and properties that have less than $1 million will protect lower and middle-income residents. Taxing multifamily properties at commercial rates will shift some of the burden from DC residents to commercial real estate companies, allowing for more savings and spending. More people living and working and spending time in DC will boost the DC economy and create a flywheel effect, especially collecting money from people who are visiting as tourists and people who come in and work for the day, commuters, as well as people coming from Maryland, Virginia to visit restaurants and retail establishments on the weekends. DC's totals competing with Maryland, Virginia. Their competitive tax rates in favorable neighborhoods have overtaken the field to live, work, and spend money in DC due to the increased crime, schools, and higher income taxes. I have in my presentation some backup, but I think one of the biggest takeaways in 2022, if you look at the lowest tax for no-income states like Florida, Tennessee, Texas, they've attracted 1 million people in 2022 alone. And the highest tax states of California, Illinois, New York, New Jersey lost 1 million people. So it's very clear that unless we stop the tide of people moving out, especially the high wage earners and the high taxpayers, we'll start losing people and the income will drop and we'll be in a downward spiral in the city from the revenue collection side of the equation.
Thank you, Paul.
I'll try to do that.
Appreciate it. Let's see, 2 more speakers on the list. Jack Evans, and then followed by Jerry Whitcomb, who's on Zoom. Hi, Jack.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for having me here today. As some background for those who don't know who I am, I moved to the city in the summers of 1975, 1976, and permanently in 1978 into Ward 2, and was a lawyer practicing law in first at the Securities and Exchange Commission, then in the private sector with a number of large firms over the last 40 years. In 91, I was elected to the city council, in place of John Wilson, who became chairman of the city council. Served on the council from 91 to 2020. During that 30-year period was also always on the finance committee, which was in the committee of the whole and then as a separate committee. Became chairman of the finance committee in 1999 and served on the Metro board for a number of years and chaired the Metro board from 2016 to 2019. So I have a long history involving the finances of the city and also oversaw the prior two tax revision commissions. They claim there was one in the 1980s. When I wasn't here, there might have been one. There doesn't seem to be any documentation of it, but the one that we started, what's that?
Definitely had an impact.
The one in 1998, I brought the book here, Taxing Simply, Taxing Fairly. Bob Ebel, who I had coffee with yesterday, shared this, and he's worth talking to. Bob can bring in a real perspective about why we did this. And oh, he's watching now, Bob. And basically, we did it because in 1995, the city and Mayor Williams was the CFO at the time. And I do want to shout out Mayor Williams and Nat Gandhi, who took a tax system that, and Mayor Williams, I'm right, was in shoe boxes on the floor in the room, right? and made it to the tax system it is today, which is one of the best in the country. And we owe you and Nat Gandhi a lot of credit for making a system that actually works pretty well overall in this government. I brought along the book from Tax Simply, Tax Fairly, because I wanted to read the challenges, which are almost what they are, which you read today. I mean, the decisions were guided by a straightforward set of principles. Number one, the district's tax system should be easy to understand and manage. Number two, it should be fair to both residents and businesses. And three, it should allow the district to attract and retain both businesses and residents. I mean, that's what a tax system is supposed to do. In those days, the tax system was chaotic, which is why we set up the Tax Review Commission. On the income tax, we had 5 or 6 or 7 classes. The property tax was the highest in the region at 215, I believe, or maybe even higher, 235. Sales tax was the highest in the region, and we were in a downward spiral. I mean, when I describe it in 95, and you look at the situation in the city today, there are parallels. Now, the city is very different today and in much better shape, but you had a declining population. You had a downtown that was largely deserted, and crime was on the upswing, if not out of control. You remember in 1995, we were the murder capital of the country, we had 500 homicides. You know, we had brought that down to 80, and now we had 220 and 200, and we're on a course to almost have 300 this year. So you see almost a parallel in the city that is, again, struggling, but the problems are very different because, again, in 1995, when we had to rebuild the city, we almost, you all in the development community, we had to rebuild the buildings, for God's sake, start over and put in place something that would bring businesses back. And that's where the TIFs and the pilots and every other alphabet soup thing that we could think of came into play to get people back. But one of the things that drove business and residents both was the certainty that the tax system, once you put it in place, would stay there and not bounce around. And the next piece of legislation, I would say it was one of the most important pieces of legislation ever done, was called the Tax Parity Act. And David Catania, who was a member of this, and myself authored that. And what the goal was in the end of 1999 was to make us competitive with Virginia. They were the jurisdiction that was always stealing everything from us. And our rates were so far out of line. And listen, I understand there's a lot of reasons people go to other jurisdictions. Schools drives a lot of residents. And a number of other reasons that people go to Virginia or Maryland or don't come here. But certainly if tax, and there are people who say, well, taxes really don't really matter, then we wouldn't be having these discussions. We wouldn't be having these pushes and pulls that they really didn't matter. They do matter, and they matter to everybody. And so, and I'm going to get to my point of what I think the recommendations were, but the Tax Parity Act The goal was to bring the income tax down from, it was up in 10 point something percent down to 8%. And we got it down to 8.5, I believe. We brought our sales tax, which was the highest in the region, to the lowest in the region at 5.75%. Brought the commercial property tax from $2.15 down to $1.85. And we became competitive. And then the goal was to keep our tax rates where they were. Because one thing business wants is certainty. I want to know that the taxes this year are going to be the same next year and the year after, not bouncing around. And residents the same way. I have to hand it to the Commonwealth of Virginia. They would close the state before they would change their tax rates. They have 4 tax rates on the income tax side, 2%, 3%, 4%, and 5.75%. That's it. It's always been that way, and it never changes. That's our competition on the residential side. On the property tax side, it's interesting. We're one of the few jurisdictions in America that splits residential from commercial. In Virginia, they're the same, $1.10. Commercials, $1.10, residential, $1.10. Now, I remember when we split it, I was here. John Wilson and Marion Barrett. John said, we're going to lower the residential rate and up the commercial rate. Because businesses, office buildings, what did he say? Don't vote, right? Well, where John was wrong on that, they do vote. They vote with their feet. And that's what we ran into, because we were losing residents and businesses. And you know, everybody argue what really doesn't drive people out. All right, we'll go with that. What we weren't getting is anybody moving here. And our corporate tax rate is the other one I wanted to talk about quickly, because we're the highest in the region at 8.25%. Virginia sits at 6%, and our other big competitor is Florida, believe it or not. And I'll get to that in a second. It sits at 3.5%. And I sat at the table with General Dynamics. I sat at the table with corporations that were moving to this region. I remember a meeting with Wes, somebody who ran it. And he looked at me and said, my board would fire me if I came to DC over Fairfax, because the corporate tax rate is 2.5% lower in Virginia. I mean, seriously. And so you couldn't compete. They would fly over the city on their way into Virginia. And you see that now all the time. And even when Marriott, you know, we were trying to get them to move into the city. And Maryland, thank God, their tax rates are pretty high out there too. I always applaud Governor O'Malley because he really helped us out a lot by raising their tax rates and making us actually in better shape in many ways than Maryland. So there are a couple of ways, and just a couple of points I want to make. When you're looking at taxes, I took this out of the mayor's budget book. There's 7 pages of taxes. So when you're looking at things, look at the other ones. It just goes on and on and on. The things we tax, the fees we have, we just kill people with various different things. And when you're talking about, you know, equity, look at these cities. I mean, these are just, you should get rid of half of them if you can. And the one I hear the most complaints about, which is not in your ballpark, is the red light cameras. I mean, talk about killing people. So red light, when you get those $250 notices in the mail, at all ends of the income scale, it sets you back. But
I just want to encourage you to get to your points.
Yes, so I'll get there really quick. Okay, so 2 points I want to make. One thing you should consider, the District of Columbia's budget now is $20 billion. 3 years ago, it was $16 billion. Do we need to be spending that much money? What drove it up? It was the $2.5 billion of federal money. The city got one-time money, drove the budget way up. And now we're dealing with, without that federal money, we're going to have a real problem balancing the budget. So do we need to be spending as much as we are? If you give the money to the government, they'll spend it. So you have to really think of that. And then the other point I wanted to make is the small number of people who are paying for the income tax. This is right out of the CAFRA. It's basically 27% of the people are paying 85% of the taxes. And so again, to try and continue to go after that 27%, to pay more of the taxes, most jurisdictions are off in their way. Nobody is as bad as we are. Nobody has such a small percentage of people paying so much of the taxes. So these would be my recommendations. And there's 2 ways you can look at this. You can kind of keep things the way they are and adjust around the edges. Or if you wanted to start over with your tax system and do dramatic things, on the residential side, 3 things matter to residents: their income tax, their property tax, and their estate tax. Right now, because of the council action in the last year, our income tax, which was 4 categories again, is now 7 categories. The top rate is 10.75, which is the 3rd highest in America. Only New York State and California have a higher income tax than we do. And so Florida, again, 0 income tax. Virginia, 5.75. The second one, our sales tax is the same as the region. It's too bad it's not lower. And our estate tax, there's only 13 jurisdictions in America that have an estate tax, and we happen to be one of them. And again, Virginia, Florida, no estate tax. If you're gonna die, and people say this all the time, go across the river and die. Don't die in your District of Columbia. And what happens, and Paul, you alluded to this, and it's good that you did. In today's world, as opposed to 10 years ago or 20 years ago, people don't have to be in the District of Columbia. And when you can, because you can work by telephone, by Zoom. So what I have heard many people do, they keep their place in the district, they buy a place in Florida, they make sure they spend 6 months, October 1st to April 15th in Florida, all the while still living in the district and pay no taxes to us at all. We lose those people. They're gone, but they're still here. We're not driving people out. We're just not getting their money. On the business side, clearly there's a couple of taxes that are killing us. The corporate tax, the unincorporated business tax. I tried to get rid of that for 30 years and we still have it. Commercial property tax, $1.85. If you're going to get businesses back downtown again, they're just not going to pay $1.85 when they can pay $1.10 in Virginia. And everybody talked about the deed and recordation tax. That's like a yo-yo, goes up and down and up and down. Nobody knows what it's going to be. So my final words are, if you have an opportunity to redo this, I would lower the income tax back down to 8.5. I put the sales tax back at 5.75. I would eliminate the estate tax entirely. It only brings us in $40 million a year, and it's rapidly falling on. And on the business side, I'd lower the corporate tax. I'd get rid of the unincorporated business tax. And the commercial property tax, as I said to the mayor the other day, you've got to bring that thing way down. Otherwise, you're just not going to get businesses back in these buildings. So that's my presentation, and good luck.
Thank you, Jack. I overlooked you, Bob, when I was speaking earlier. Sorry, you were not on my
All right.
old list.
I'm Bob Cohen, CEO of Perseus Realty. We build apartment offices and so forth in the region. And I just joined a day and a half ago, so I haven't put together, unless I was gonna call AI to write this thing for me, but.
You should have done that.
Maybe you take all these notes and put them all together.
Yeah.
You know, everything that was said is very meaningful in regard to attracting and retaining residents in the city. Nobody really mentioned the retail. Richard did a little bit. I'm big on figuring out a way to make it more attractive. And I did come up with one thought about and I don't have the backup material for it, is that we should bifurcate the assessments of buildings to where the retail is assessed at one number and the rest of the building is assessed at the other number. And we should give the retailers a substantial tax break, and the owners should reduce the rents to those retailers by the amount of savings that they accrued in the tax rate, so that we can attract and keep retailers. But we're never gonna do that until we get more people to come back into the city. And why are they gonna come back into the city? Because it's a good place to be. It's got amenities, it's got a lot to offer. The city has a lot to offer. But from everything I've heard here, we're doing everything we can not to make it attractive. So I'll spend more time on that as I have time to do it. But if we don't change a number of these things, it's not just for the rich real estate developers who aren't so rich anymore. But it's for everybody. It's for everybody. And I think one ingredient that Tony and I talked about the other day a little bit, we need to find a way to educate the council members. Because right now, if the city is broken up into the wards like it is, half the residents live in wards that either don't pay taxes or don't understand business. And so you can't communicate to them. So you have to communicate to the council members and try to educate them as to the importance of what we're talking about here, with all these these wonderful ideas. And I think that we've got to find a way to make it attractive for them to spend some time with the commission or with individuals and try to pursue an avenue of education.
And we will wrap up with Jerry Whitcomb is online. Yes, Jerry?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Oh, thank you, Richard, for nodding. I'm here, I think, because I wear two hats. I'm the Director of Economic Development for the Downtown Business Improvement District, and also I'm a former Executive Director of the Tax Revision Commission, the last one. And I'll tip my hat also to Bob Ebel, as Jack did, because he was a great advisor as I entered into that realm back in a couple of years ago. I'd also offer a little bit of background. I spent 10 years at Goldman Sachs on Wall Street. I worked in the OCFO's office. And like Jack said, that was back in 1998. We took the city's 401k program, it's called something else, but from a bunch of boxes to give it to someone like Fidelity so it could get modernized. And so thank you, Tony, for that. And the city has come a long way. You all have a very tough job ahead of you, particularly with the declining revenues that the city's facing right now, or the slowing of the revenue growth and much slower than inflation on the expense side. I'll go back to something that Jack said also, and that I learned during my experience, was that the basic economic goal to finance a government is broaden the base and lower the rates. And you've heard some of that today. It's much harder actually to do it than to say it, but it is what you want to do. You want to broaden the base and lower the rates so that you can finance the services of the government. And of course, we all argue about what that is. But again, I also learned that if you want more of something, lower the tax rate. If you want less of something, you increase the tax rate. And so those are some things I would just pass on to the commissioners. Again, we also want to have balance. I think you really have to look at the competition. And then you also have to look at fairness. We have a very progressive income tax, and I think that's great. Not everyone agrees, but I personally think that's fine. You also need to understand there's no perfect research. I remember last time we had research that showed it was fine to raise the individual tax rate, and we had research that said it wasn't. And so there is no perfect research, and there's no place in America or the world like Washington, D.C., with the unique situation with Maryland and Virginia. And the commissioners, you all have to listen to each other. I think basically at the end of the program last time, everybody got two things and had to take two things that they didn't really like or they disagreed with. And that's really the nature of compromise. And I would encourage you to listen to each other and to think about the things that matter to you and think about the things that you don't agree with, but you can accept to try to move forward. Then moving on to downtown, downtown has always succeeded despite its high cost because it provided high value. And some of that is at risk today. Right now, we have about 65% of the economic activity that we had before. And most of it's due to the fact that only 43% of office workers are coming to the office, and that's 75% of our built environment. We have a record office vacancy rate of almost 19%, and we have a record retail vacancy rate of about 22%. In the city-wide, we have about 25 million of vacant office space, soon to be 27 million, and that is causing intense competition, causing effective rents to go down, causing values to go down. We're also very concerned about crime and the perception of crime. We had a tagline back in 1998 when the bid got started, 1996 actually, and thank you, Jack, for pushing that legislation through. Our tagline was dull, dirty, and dangerous, and we don't want to go back to those days. So crime is very important to us. Also Metro, how do we finance Metro? And then the whole comment about uncertainty. There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty in the private market, and then if the government adds to that uncertainty, it makes for a very, very difficult path forward. Also with OTR, we've had a good relationship with OTR. They collect our bid taxes for us. We've worked with them on assessments. I would encourage them to look at the stock prices of JBG and Boston properties, they're at about 60% of their pre-pandemic. And the latest numbers I've seen is that we've reduced our large office building assessments or revenues by 15%, going to 21%. But again, they seem like they are a little bit on the high side. I would like to see a little bit more research on businesses leaving DC. Our research shows that we don't see that, but we don't see everything. But certainly with office tenants, we're not seeing people leaving. We're seeing people downsize quite a bit. But we have seen a couple people come in. Richard, thank you for bringing in International Baccalaureate to City Ridge. And we've had a couple other nice successes, but they pale against the current vacancies that we have. Going forward, I'd ask the commission to during this difficult time to do no harm. I should go back and just jump on one thing. There are a couple ways to raise revenues. You can increase tax rates, but I think it's more effective if you increase the tax base, more residents, more jobs, more visitors. Regulations could have a huge impact on revenues. We've talked a little bit about TOPA. If we got to the same level of sales that the other jurisdictions do that don't have TOPA, Virginia and Maryland, that would raise, almost, I think, over $100 million. Rent control not being means tested, has a significant impact on revenue. First Source and CBE, those are expensive programs. There's a premium for doing those. Those could produce more revenues. And also the no tax on groceries, that's not a means tested thing. There are some things we can do there that could raise revenues that are outside of the Tax Revision Commission, but are very important. And then finally, the fiscal policy, the rainy day fund and the debt cap. It's no secret that I've been long a proponent of the rainy day fund is too big and the debt cap is too tight. Those would allow some things to happen in terms of increasing revenues for certain uses. Now moving forward, do no harm. Please make downtown more attractive. Bob Cohen mentioned that, and I think in order to try to invest in parks, and we invite the commission to participate in the upcoming downtown action agenda that will run from May to November. We will look at a series of recommendations. We did this back in 2000. It was very successful. Investing in our parks, investing in our homeless infrastructure, investing in business attraction, increasing the funding of the Vitality Fund. And specifically for this budget, we're very supportive of the mayor's housing downtown tax abatements. Tax abatements are just a very efficient way of, a very effective way of financing investments. But we also suggest that there be other investments from Brooke Pinto's Recovery Act legislation, some money, $5 million for the Vitality Fund, $5 million for the retail that I think Bob Cohen mentioned we need to bring back, and $5 million for Safe Corridors grant program. All these would be competitive grants, and that would be really important. Also, some of the comments people made about the ability to change your tax status during a conversion, and certainly put in a clawback that if it doesn't stay residential and goes back to office, people owe for that back taxes. But there's an example of 1125 15th Street. It was valued in the office market at $40 million. Lincoln Properties paid $80 million for it as a residential project, but they're still being taxed as an office building. That's just, that should change when people purchase and possibly sign a document that says they'll make it residential. And again, there can be a clawback if it's necessary. As we think about Metro going forward, I'd like to encourage you to really consider a regional sales tax. That would be a very, very broad base and could be a very small increase. Also, getting comfortable with the dedication of property taxes for services like park maintenance. All of our business improvement districts have taken on a big burden with parks, and going through the general budget process, is a very difficult thing for us to do. And that is it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jerry.
Nobody mentioned, that one of the reasons that people don't want to go back to the office is because of the traffic. It's not about the pandemic anymore. A lot of it has to do with traffic. And this city has taken on these bike lanes that are just gridlocking traffic. And I think that's one of the reasons that that I know it's an uphill battle, it's a big fight, it's going on all over every day, but if we keep shrinking the size of the streets and putting more cars on them, people will never want to come back.
But I was gonna ask you, now that you're speaking, what would your one recommendation do that could help, stimulate retail, which was under, threat even before COVID?
Well, that's what I mentioned, where I think we're gonna give tax abatements to bifurcate the tax assessment process. And then give the benefit to the retailers and ask the landlords to reduce the rents commensurate with the benefits.
But we tried. I mean, Vince Gray and I did that. We reduced the commercial property tax from $1.85 to $1.65. And tried to get the owners of the buildings to, because they have these triple net leases, to pass through to the tenants. And
But unfortunately, most of those downtown commercial buildings, they tend not to be triple net, they tend to be gross ups. So Bob's right, you need to have corresponding relief.
Yeah.
But there's one other idea that I think we're gonna need to, and I don't know if it's in this body, but, we're gonna recover at some point. And the question is, where is all the tenant living money gonna come from to reopen these restaurants and businesses? And a lot of these older buildings, existing buildings, don't have that in their budget. So one idea is to actually look at taking a slice of sales tax, putting it into a sinking fund to attract and to reinvest in new businesses as we go. Because I'm very fearful, just like in the office, we don't have enough tenant living money to attract office. I don't think we're gonna have nearly enough to re-enter out, retail.
So another question, Jack, you wanted, income tax, reduce setback, sales, make some adjustments, and this and that and this stuff. Where would we find the money for that? So like last time, we reduced taxes in the last tax
Right.
revision, but the economy was on the up. Now we're kind of,
the only way you could do it, like with the Tax Parity Act, is over time. You have to put it, it goes from 10.75 to 10 to, and that's what we did, and finally get down to 8%. 4 years, we have triggers in that stop it if it doesn't work. That's how we made those changes then. You can't do it all at once, but you have to have a plan to bring it all down in the hopes. I mean, you're absolutely right. If the economy doesn't, what this entire government is doing right now, they have $1.2 billion, as you know, of funny money in this budget right here. It's $500 million of red light cameras, $275 million from the reserves fund, and $300 million right out of Marion Barry's playbook, funded vacant positions. That's how this budget is balanced, $1.2 billion, with the hope that the CFO recognizes $500 million of new revenue. That doesn't happen. We're 1995 all over again. You're underwater. There's no way of bailing yourself out of this thing.
Hey, Tony, I would attack it, and I agree with what Jack said, but I think you have to look at the states where it's working. The reason why record companies are moving to Texas and to Florida and Miami and the Carolinas and Tennessee, you look at the 6 income tax-free states, they're the ones getting all the people who are moving in there. So I think you have to look at how they do it. And, my home in DC, if we're down in Florida, would probably be, paying 4x taxes I'm paying in DC. So people go down there, they don't pay income taxes, so they think they're getting a benefit from the man. But there's a franchise tax, there's sales taxes, and then there's high residential property taxes. That's how they make the difference. But there's a different perception of someone's mind when they say, I'm not paying income taxes. But on parity, they're paying 85% what they would pay if they stayed in DC. And I can tell you, the people who moved in Florida, it's not all that fun. It's already hotter than hell down there right now in April. And they're thinking, I did this and it changed this lifestyle. And back when I grew up, Florida was about ex-cons and felons and tax evaders. And so they don't want to be down there year round. They want to be in DC and have everything DC has to offer. But they're sick and tired of being nickel-dimed. They're sick and tired of the got you game with the speed traps.
yeah,
The cameras
okay,
everywhere.
okay.
So there's a way to do
I
it,
got you, I
to
got
get it
you.
done.
Okay, I don't want to take all the questions on that other.
Can I just, for 30 seconds, there's 3 taxes that I want you to look at. The jock tax, everybody knows what that is. It's taxing athletes, professional athletes. They pay taxes in every jurisdiction where they play, except the District of Columbia. The second thing is the lawyer's tax. We tried that. I'm a lawyer. I live in Virginia. I work in the district and my firm has offices all over the country. I pay everywhere but the District of Columbia. And residents of Maryland and Virginia who work for the DC government, pay them. Don't pay us taxes. They pay them in Maryland and Virginia. They should pay us taxes. Every one of those is a congressional change against the Home Rule Act and the commuter tax. But the jock tax, the lawyer's tax, and the DC government resident worker tax, I mean, they are just no-brainers. Maybe with this Congress, you could get it through. It's $1 billion altogether of new revenue.
Before we get the red session back in town.
Yes.
John, you mentioned that in your garden apartments, you're being assessed used through the camera system. I thought that income generating properties were assessed through the income-based model where you would submit your income and expense statements and then the CFO like takes and capitalize them. So are garden apartments treated differently?
No.
Just not clarify.
No, they use camera because of the volume and the fact that they have to reassess every year. So they can't look at, and there's a timing issue about when they get their income and expense reports, and that's been debated about whether it should be moved so that they can see it. But in my experience, even though we filed it, even though it's in front of them, they don't use it. And in my appeals, I bring it to them, I put it in my submission. I put the most recent use in the submission. I get there and they don't look at it. So in practice, that's the way it works. In theory, or maybe in regulation, they're supposed to. But, you know, then you go from there to RIP tax. RIP tax are rubber stamp in 98% of the cases to a first level appeal. So now I'm filing in court and waiting 3 years to get a decision and wasting a lot of money, and no offense to David, giving a third of the savings to an attorney to represent me. Less, okay. 25%. So who wins there? I mean, what is that model? That's broken, is what that is. That's a broken system.
Yeah, I'm, a lot to say, and you have to say, Mr. Cohen, I took great exception to your remarks about not understanding certain things and their council members needing to be educated. I think that's a really toxic way of doing public policy and advocacy. I would really encourage you to refrain from that.
I think you missed my point. My point was that people who live in various places vote for the council members.
I avoid that characterization, but anyway.
No, I appreciate your comment, but that's not what I meant.
Obviously, it would be great to have low taxes, and I mean, obviously, this environment would attract more people. I think the question though, Jack, about whether or not, I think you said lowering taxes means income goes up. I think we tried that in the national economy several times. It didn't work. And there is, certainly certain people do depopulate because of it, but our competition in some ways is Manhattan and San Francisco, because there are certain attributes that come with living in a city and expenses that come with living in an urban area that we as a city maintain. I don't want to emulate Governor Greg Abbott's view of social services in Texas. I don't think that's something to race to. And we as a city have said that we're not going to have an expenditure rate that competes with that. But if there's no one to pay the taxes, your point's well taken. But I'm still looking for the data that shows that how many people actually left, how many, income tax returns in excess $250,000, the tax rate went up, were there fewer people filing? And you see cranes coming in, you see people moving in. And we really need from the CFO's office data that shows that, because we actually had data that they showed earlier on that shows the number of high income tax returns filed actually went up. So I think as an institution, it'd be great to get some clarity from the CFO's office, because I understand your points and they're well taken, but we have other data that says somewhat different. So it'd be great to get a real clarity on
Look
that.
at the CAFRA from the time we lowered income taxes in in 2001, 2, 3, whatever it was, you'll find that there's about 60,000 people of over $100,000 paying taxes. And today it's 100,000. So you can see it went up based on lower taxes. And our population went over 700,000, right? Now that the tax rate's up at 10.75, I'm not saying it's taxes low, and I said that in my comments. Crime is probably driving the city faster than anything else right now. But it's coming down as the taxes go up. Listen, there's a school of thought of what you're saying. Raise the taxes as high as you possibly can in every possible category and get as much money as you can and hope for the best.
Okay, so keep him.
Right, so I guess, I think, but to your point, that taxes are one of many factors. And when the economy's booming and the city's having a renaissance, people are gonna say, well, gee, I really like being here. But when there are things not going so great, crime, city services perhaps, telework, then maybe it's that deciding factor that says, yeah, I'm gonna go to Florida, or I'm gonna move my business to Roslyn, or something else. But I guess we talked earlier about the resiliency, and I wonder if you guys have any ideas about a tax structure that would kind of weather all those ups and downs and these broader forces, or does it all come down to, income tax, property tax, sales tax? And then in particular, I really thank you for your thoughtful proposal. And it's worth noting, you actually recommended raising a couple taxes, which is really provocative, but could you talk more about why you think the income tax is decrease warrants, and why people psychologically would say, yeah, I'm paying less income tax, but my sales tax went up or the property tax went up. And obviously that it has great impact for people who are not property owners, who are paying most of their income in sales tax. But the people you're talking about trying to retain or keep or not have to leave, can you talk a little more about?
But I think it goes to human nature. I mean, first of all, you look at the tax base, and who's paying what? I think we had this statistic here, that 84% of income tax revenues generate about 27% of the residents. So that's one topic. The people who, I get back to the technology. And when COVID came, it was COVID, it's working at home and being stuck in home, plus the fact technology enabled them to leave. So the people who could leave left. It didn't have to be the people who had the means to leave, could buy a place in the Carolinas or buy a place in Florida or Tennessee. They left. And so what my proposal is that let's replicate the places where these people are going. Because people who are lifelong Washingtonians don't move to Florida or Tennessee. They want to stay here. But we've been kind of pushing them out, and it's sort of a law of unintended consequences. And so, my feeling is that you can do this flywheel effect. You lower income taxes. You get people who have wealthier households above $1 million, get them to pay their fair share, because our property taxes on the residential side are very, very low compared to these other states where there's no income taxes. And then you raise slightly the sales taxes. The flywheel effect is that people come back in, they'll have more money, they'll start spending more money, and that will create more revenue for the city. And that's what we model. We have a very detailed model that we can send you that shows how this plays out. And I'd love for Glenn and his staff and this committee to take a look at the model. We can work you through it, and it works. And in fact, it's not because I came up with it. It's the fact that it's been working in Florida, in Tennessee, in Texas, and I'm not saying anything about Its social policies. I have no idea what that means. I'm just, you look at Texas, and people move to Texas because low taxes, low income taxes, pro-business, quality life, good schools. And we own some of the biggest corporate headquarters buildings in this country. And we have a front row seat why these people choose to move where they've moved. And they're all moving for the same reason. The 5 things I just told you. And if we can't compete with those 5 things, we have to throw our hands up and say it's over. And so the playbook that most cities have been utilizing the past 50 years, just continue to raise taxes when there's a budget deficit, doesn't work because the people have left the building. They're moving out. The people who can move out are moving out. And when I hear people in New York saying, yeah, but we're replacing that population with newer people, younger people, those younger people are not making the $8 million a year or $5 million a year that these hedge fund guys made. They're now living in Florida. And that's where the hole is in the whole approach to this. So it is a little bit of a supply side concept. I get it. But it's to bring people back in here and spending money, sales taxes, taxing residential the way it should be taxed, And building the population of the city in 1950 was 800,000 people. It's hard to believe where it is right now. It's gone down. It's gone down because we've had the suburbs that have grown, but we are one of the greatest cities in the world. We should have a much bigger population than we have. And this idea can build population, it can solve for affordable housing, and it can build a much robust budget that's sustainable for the long haul.
I would like to jump in a little bit here and just say, it's a balance of value here. People I think are willing to pay more in taxes if they're getting more for it. Part of the reason they're moving to Texas, this stuff is everything is cheaper. It's not just taxes. And if that was the case here, our property taxes would be even lower. And so I think it's about a balance here. And I don't think it's one solution solves everything. And so I would like to just put a little bit more in there that sometimes, having a higher tax base because you provide more social services or more amenities. Again, downtown has succeeded, as a higher cost area up until recently. And now we have to, I think, go back to 2000 and make those investments again, whether it's in parks or whatever it is, to attract people back. But I think you can succeed as having higher tax rates than other people if you provide value for them.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I appreciate all the conversation. I think it is a balance, and it's also a discussion about our values. Our tax policy adjusts to our values. I think what we're really experiencing is we have to redefine the why. Why do you live in DC? Why do you work? So we used to have a very simple model. You followed the jobs. Jobs came to a jurisdiction and you had to live near the jobs, or you had to come into the city for the jobs. That value proposition has changed. We have other alternatives. I'm not saying we're permanently going to stay at 40% moving, coming into the city, but I think the new normal has been different than it was. We could all assess that. So that reality is there. To me, it's about the balance. And I hear you, Paul. The concern I have is that increasing the sales tax really affects lower income, because more of their disposable income goes to sales. They're buying goods, and more of their dollars they really count on are actually going to be taxed. So I do concern, and I also don't want to be at a disadvantage comparatively, since our retailers already have a burden with so many other factors. To the other point, the other jurisdictions that we deal with have figured out the urban lifestyle. They have done a much better job than they did in the past. Arlington, Bethesda, they have figured out that urban quality of life. And if we don't focus on how do we improve the quality of life, because I think we're at a quality of life discussion for the city, not just a tax policy, but really, what are we offering our, which is our citizenship? What are we giving them? What is their value for living in the city? And that goes to all the other things that go into a decision of where I want to raise my children, where I want to live, how I want to age in place. So I know this is, you're talking about tax, but I think it's a bigger conversation. And I think that the tax policies, they could be simplified or a bit more clear to understand. And I agree with Jack. Please, if you say you're going to do something, do it, and then stay one.
I think that's a really good place to end the conversation, reminding us to take it back to our values and our key value propositions. You all have been incredibly generous with your time. It's 5 o'clock at King 10 L Street.
Can I ask you a question? Somebody raised a good point. Like when you have your plan, will we have an opportunity to react to it, or is the plan is just going to the council?
No, we'll be presenting as getting
Feel that maybe like the same
and
panel.
then we'll have to figure out the exact mechanics of.
Okay, great.
Good. We did this last time. What did I say? Yes.
Nick, can I jump in there for 1 second? Just one thing that was very effective last time was
I gotta go.
that we posted.
Jerry, we're wrapping up.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, exactly. We will be making copious use of our website, email lists, and so on. Thanks, everybody, for your time.
Thanks, everybody.
And we will continue to be in touch. Good catch.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Awesome.
David, great to see you. Great to see you again.